Good morning, everyone.
Good morning,
everyone.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning.
Good to see everybody. Keith Brooks from the Education Department, as well as the Faculty Development Team. Welcome to the 2012-2013 season of Primetime Community Library. Primetime is a year-long celebration of the academic and experiential accomplishments of our faculty, students, and staff, and is a collaboration between Friends of the People Library and many other offices on campus. Join us on Thursday, October 4th, as Dan Rokoff expands on Dave Kinnaman's book called You Lost Me: Why Young Christians Are Leaving Church and Rethinking Faith. This talk takes the insights offered in his book and applies them to the classroom, and helps teachers come alongside our students better as they rethink and reframe their faith journeys. Today we welcome Professor of English, Dr. Marion Larson, and Associate Professor of Philosophy, Dr. Sara Shady, as they share about Bethel's involvement in the recent White House Interfaith Campus Challenge in their presentation, Interfaith Engagement in a Pluralistic World. Let's welcome them.
Hi. We know that you've probably heard or seen in publications things about the fact that Bethel is participating in this White House Interfaith Campus and Community Challenge. And so we thought that it would be great to have a forum where we could explain what we're doing, kind of just the nuts and bolts of the program, but also talk about the rationale behind it, and then hopefully have a chance to facilitate some dialogue altogether about maybe long-term goals for Bethel, thinking about interfaith engagement as a Christian liberal arts university. But first, I'll just talk a little bit about the White House Project, so you know what that is when you hear that mentioned. In the summer of 2011, the White House launched what they call the President's Interfaith and Community Service Campus Challenge. President Obama has, in his administration, talked, in his inaugural address and his famous Cairo speech, different times about the importance of using our religious pluralism as a strength as a country. How do we, in terms of civic goals, think about creating solidarity and partnerships that cross faith divides? It's not that this is owned by President Obama by any means. I mean, I think that this is something that spans both political parties. But it's the program is housed in the Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. So most major branches of government, like the Department of Education, the EPA, USAID, they all have their own Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. So these offices coordinate them with the campuses participating. So in the first year of the initiative, 250 schools applied to participate and were selected to participate. Of CCCU schools, the major ones that you might be familiar with include Bethel, Messiah, Gordon, and George Fox. So Bethel participated in the first year. We were pleased to be recognized by the Department of Education and invited to present at a panel in Washington, D.C. This summer, we took one of our student leaders, a community partner with us, and that was a wonderful way for Bethel to speak about doing this project at a Christian college and what that looks like, as well as talking about one of our projects utilizing a National Day of Service as a way to do interfaith service. Bethel is signed on to participate in the initiative for a second year. They're hoping to have 500 schools across the nation participate. The applications are due by October 15th, so we'll kind of know the numbers after that and know if we have any more CCCU partners in this project at that time. The goals of the initiative are centered around the idea of providing opportunities for students of different faith traditions to serve and dialogue together. Some of you may be familiar with the work of Ibu Patel, who's the founder of Interfaith Youth Corps based in Chicago, but that is spread across the country. The idea was starting with junior high students and now up through college. What if you take some Muslim students, some Jewish students, some agnostic students, some Buddhist students, and have them work on a Habitat for Humanity house together, share pizza, talk about motivations from faith in each of their services, then all of a sudden the Jewish kid or the Muslim kid or the Christian kid in the cafeteria don't seem so strange and so other. And so how do we educate students from a young age onward for productive interfaith service? So this program extends that to the college level. The idea is also, though, not just about what's happening on campus. The community aspect is about helping colleges and universities think through how to build constructive partnerships with the campuses surrounding those communities. And so we've been doing some partnerships along with our Frogtown community partnership. It's important to note, specifically within our context, one of the reasons we feel comfortable participating in this initiative is that it's very clearly stressed that the goals are civic pluralism, not theological pluralism. In fact, from the leaders of the initiative down, it's very clear that those goals of getting students to interact together, we've got to figure out how to do that well in a sense where we're allowed to maintain strong commitment to our faith traditions. If we just water it down in order to figure out how to build partnerships, that's not going to be satisfying to anyone. So how do we celebrate the strength of our faith commitments, recognize the differences and distinctives, but still think about forging civic partnerships together? So we'll talk a little bit about that later. Just really briefly, our initiative has been supported wholeheartedly by Jay and Deb. Thank you, Deb, for your support of the project. We have decided for year 1 and 2 that the project is formally housed under Deb in the Office of Academic Affairs, but we have broad committee membership. So we do have 5 faculty members on our team, Marion and myself, Curtis Young, Naomi Ludeman-Smith, and Amy Poppinga. Camden Brecky represents the campus ministry side of things, and Chris Frank, Associate Dean in Student Life, helps represent the Student Life arm. So we're trying to do our 3-legged stool.
And Leon.
Oh, and Leon, yes. Leon's our administrative representative on the team and working with the Office of Diversity. Thank you. And we also have student leaders. Last year, Edwin Gonzalez, Tim Larson, and Paige Martin were our 3 student leaders. If any of you are familiar with their great work, we're still working on finalizing our team of student leaders for this year. And we work with community partners. Melvin Giles has been a great partner to us. Sean Moore, you might be familiar with them, also working with other groups and leaders in the Frogtown neighborhood. To highlight just quickly a few of the things we did in our first year of the initiative, we did both academic experiential things and experiential service things. So starting off the year, we took a group of students to the state capitol for an interfaith service memorial on the 10th anniversary of September 11th. Don Postema hosted the film of Gods and Men in partnership with Film Forum. We took students, as Marion and I have been doing for several years, and others, to the SPIN dialogue, St. Paul Interfaith Network. Last year that series was called Eyes Wide Open. The Mulberg Conference had a focus on interfaith dialogue and reconciliation. And then we partnered with the Minnesota Dawa Institute, whose mosque is housed in the Frogtown neighborhood. And we took students to the mosque for some interfaith dialogue and a tour of the mosque. And then the Dawa Institute brought students on campus here for another dialogue. So we had those partnerships going on. In terms of service projects, we did a few different things. The ones that we're hoping to replicate this year because they were successful on Martin Luther King Day, actually the eve of Martin Luther King Day, we partnered with Hamlin's Multi-Faith Alliance. Hamlin is one of the 250 schools participating in the President's Initiative. And we went to Concordia University and set up everything needed for the big Martin Luther King Day rally there. And we had Bethel students and Hamlin students had pizza together, talked about different faith traditions, learned about, what motivates each other for service. It was a great experience, and we're, for both schools, we're going to be doing that event again this year. As well as we did a spring project in the Frogtown Community Gardens, 4 different gardens. We took Bethel students there, worked in the gardens for a few hours, and then had food together, and Melvin Giles arranged for several community elders from different faith perspectives to be at that event and speak to our students about the importance of faith partnerships in their neighborhood, how they go about navigating those things, how they think about meaningful service in their own faith context. So that's a little bit about what we've been doing, but we want to spend more time talking about why do we think it's really crucial that we're doing this? What are we hoping our students and ourselves learn and accomplish? Kind of what are some of our hopes moving forward? And yes, we are participating in the White House Initiative. At the same time, we're much more concerned just about, how do we do this at Bethel? How do we create long-term sustainable plans regarding interfaith engagement at our institution? So I'm going to turn it over to Marion to talk about this a little bit.
And I'll drive too.
Okay.
So I like pressing these buttons. Okay, so why interfaith learning at Bethel? And I'm imagining that several of you have some ideas as well, which is part of the reason why you came. But we wanted to start by suggesting some things that we've been thinking about, and we've got some opportunity for discussion a little bit later. So if you think about in our 21st century context, it's not difficult to document the fact that in large part because of immigration patterns over the last few decades, America is increasingly a nation with numerous religions represented. At the same time, America has a history of being a very religiously devout nation. So it's not just a place where there are people from a bunch of different faiths. You have many people who take those faiths seriously, and then we have laws that allow people to have quite a bit of religious freedom. So that's part of the context. In our country, we also have a long civic tradition of people bringing their faith into their efforts to engage with what's going on in politics or in society. You think also about the world context. Some of the best things that have gone on in the world have been religiously motivated, and some of the most horrible things that have gone on in the world, not just in the past, but currently, have stemmed from religious violence. A point that Eboo Patel makes in his first book, Acts of Faith, is he references W.B. Du Bois, who talks about the problem of the color line. And Patel argues that he thinks in the 21st century the main issue will be the problem of the faith line. And we think he's absolutely right. And so this is the world in which our students live. This is the world in which they'll be living and moving and working when they graduate. There are a lot of wonderful things about being a relatively homogeneous community when it comes to religion on our campus. But of course, we're not preparing students well to engage in that world if they're not actually engaging in that world. So that's one of the reasons why we think interfaith learning is important. Okay, I've already talked about that. Do you want to add anything, Sara?
No, yeah, you're doing fine.
Okay.
Keep driving.
Okay. So one of the reasons that we made the bibliography that we did, and we didn't know how many copies to bring, so if you didn't get a copy, catch one of us after or email us. I'd be happy to send you a copy. That isn't even close to a complete bibliography, but we started with either things we ourselves had written or things that we have read recently. But there's an increasing body of literature on this particular subject, some of it written not only by Christians, but by Christians who would be comfortable people spending time at Bethel. I'll just say it, I'm not really sure, evangelical or close enough to that. I don't really like these labels very much, but anyway. Eboo Patel is Muslim. He is the founder and president of the Interfaith Youth Corps, which I think has been around for probably about 10 years, Sara. His family is from India. He was raised in Glen Ellen, Illinois. And in Acts of Faith, he basically tells the story of how he, as a person studying diversity, especially racial and cultural diversity, and studying sociology, how he came to be aware of his own religious tradition and came to take his own faith seriously, in large part because of interactions he had with people of other faith traditions. Brian McLaren, which this is a book I haven't read yet, but Sara is reading it. This might be the best book title ever. Why did Jesus, Moses, and the Buddha and Muhammad cross the road? And apparently, if you want to find out why, you got to read that book.
He's wrestling with the tension in our Christian identity of that challenge of how do we stay deeply committed in our own faith tradition. What does that mean in terms of our relationships with people of other faith traditions? Yeah, that book just came out this fall.
And then Jake and Rhonda Jacobson, faculty members at Messiah. Those of you who have been through the faith learning workshops in the last few years have read at least one of their books. They've written 2 books specifically on stuff that falls under the faith learning integration umbrella. And their newest book
is called No Longer Invisible: Religion in University Education. And the book isn't exclusively about interfaith, but they do have a chapter on thinking about preparing students for a religiously diverse world. Some of Miroslav Volf's recent work. And this is sort of like show and tell, I know. But and then Eboo Patel's newest book, Sacred Ground, is another one that addresses some of these issues. We had to put Bethel's institutional values up here, I have to say. But we very much think that preparing our students to interact effectively in a diverse world and taking very seriously interfaith kinds of issues is very consistent with Bethel's institutional values.
I think there's a movement to students initially coming in thinking, whoa, as a Christian, I'm not supposed to have anything to do with Muslims, to thinking, well, in spite of my Christianity, I'll do this, to because of my Christianity, I'll do this, because of my love for God and love for neighbor, I will build constructive relationships. And so we feel like it's very consistent with all of our values to encourage students to think about how am I going to live constructively as a Christian in the 21st century when I'm going to have Muslim, Buddhist, humanist neighbors, colleagues in the workplace, teachers at my children's school. How do I navigate that world? And we don't, in our own campus, give them the opportunity to learn how to do that. And so how do we help them learn those lessons outside of our campus?
Yeah, related to that, one of the points that Volf makes in his book, which I think right, this one. In his latest book, A Public Faith, one of the points he makes is he says, like it or not, in increasing parts of the world, and perhaps in our own country, Christians can no longer count on being the dominant religious voice, can no longer count on being the group that has the most voice, the loudest voice. And so he argues that the big challenge for Christians is how to remain true to your faith while also recognizing that there are a lot of other people from other faiths who have a right and a desire to be conversation partners at the table and to be participating in shaping the world. All right. So here's a couple of questions that we would that we would hope that the work we might do together will get students to take really seriously. One question is, what does it mean to love my neighbor when my neighbor is from a different faith tradition? And I know that at one level that's hardly a new question. Some of the aha moment for me reading Volf's book was he spends a lot of time talking about, okay, what did Jesus say about what does it mean to love my neighbor? When we're told to love God and love our neighbor as ourselves, how do we put those two pieces together? And he argues that a really significant part of that includes respect in a very deep sense, that asking how do I want to be treated by others when it comes to the way they would approach me in interacting with me about my faith, that I need to be willing to extend the same kind of respect to them. But getting students to very much grapple with that question. One of the points that Patel makes in his book, one of his challenges is he argues that one thing that people of all faith traditions ought to do is that we ought to ask, what fuel might we have in the texts and the stories of our own traditions that can help to motivate us to and provide examples for us about how to treat people of other faiths. And so he has a couple of examples from Islam, and his take on the Good Samaritan is really wonderful. So he says, I know that Christians and many non-Christians are familiar with the story of the Good Samaritan. And what he points out here, which I'll read you like one paragraph, I just think this is terrific. So he says, clearly, helping those in need is an important part of this story. And he points out, the lesson that you've probably heard in sermons before. You notice it's the religious leaders who are not the ones who do this. He says, but he argues that the story is not about the priest and the Levite. And it's not about the man who gets beat up. The story is about the Good Samaritan, who's the one who does the right thing in this story. His actions are described in rich detail, using oil and wine, valuable resources, to dress the wounds, using his own animal to transport the man, spending his own time caring for him, offering the innkeeper whatever money is necessary to nurse him back to health. Jesus is telling a story about people who were not part of the original audience hearing the story. In fact, he is making one of them the hero of the story. The Samaritans were not just the other. They were not just despised. The Samaritans were heretics. They were people of another faith. And so then, then 2 pages later, Patel says, okay, there are certainly places in Scripture where Jesus makes it clear that believing in exactly the same way that, say, a Samaritan would is not what Jesus is upholding. But the point is that there are stories within our own tradition that might suggest here are ways in which we can come to respect and value the contributions that people might make, even if they're from traditions that we wouldn't support. Do you want to talk about this one?
Yeah, I think this is a challenge that that students face, that we face ourselves in terms of in these interactions with people of a different faith tradition. When the goal is service, when the goal is civic partnership, there an importance of, in one sense, being able to bracket, not erase, not deny, but bracket some of the things I might think or want to say about my own faith tradition. McLaren, in his book, says one of the challenges for each religious tradition in itself to figure out is how do we make sure that love of God does not start eclipsing love of neighbor? How do we make sure that, nobody says my love of God, I love God devoutly and I'm hostile towards other religions. I mean, we don't self-describe as hostile, but we justify our devout love as a reason to not be in relationship with other people because they don't love the same God as me. They don't support the same God as me. But if, so how do we allow love of God to motivate us towards love of neighbor when the neighbor is a religious other? And so something that we talk with students and we work with students and we think about is the right time to speak, the right time to listen, the right time to learn and hear. And that even if my mouth is going to be quiet, that doesn't mean my actions have to be quiet. That, while I might not say everything I think at a particular time, at the same time, we do, in dialogues, provide students to say what they think. But, kind of working through the appropriateness of that. But regardless of what I'm bracketing off temporarily, intellectually, or verbally, that love and service is something I never have to bracket off, and that speaks volumes about my commitment to my own faith tradition.
I think we have this on a different slide, but I'm thinking of it now, so I'll say it now. One of the things that both talks about is the view from here and the view from there. And he argues, so the view from here basically means the view that I'm comfortable with. It's the view from within my own tradition. And the view from there is the view that a person outside my tradition might have toward my own tradition. And he argues that that significant conversations with people of other faith traditions can be instructive for so many, in so many ways. I mean, for one thing, I have a very good friend who's Jewish. We have dinner together a couple of times a year. And I remember I was all excited about some sermon I had heard from one of the Gospels. And I was telling her this story, and I said, and I used the word Pharisees, and she said, "No, wait a second." She said, I'm a Pharisee. And she's one of the most loving people that I know. She takes her faith more seriously than most Christians that I know. So she said, I'm a Pharisee, and she said, to be honest, I've always really struggled with the way the Pharisees are talked about in the Gospels. So that led to just an awesome conversation. And now when I go back and read the Gospels, I think differently about what Jesus is maybe trying to say. And similarly, so she's often asking, so it gave me a chance to hear her view from there. Here's a question she's always had about Christianity, and she respected me enough to ask me that question and kind of going the other way. I think the part of the word that Wolf uses, he says it can be helpful to hear other people say, you know, my impression of Christianity has always been X, or don't Christians think this, or doesn't the Bible say that? It gives us a chance to say, well, you know, from my perspective, it's really like this. And similarly, instead of just, I read this book about Islam, here's a chance to hear a person who fasts during Ramadan talk about the discipline of fasting and what that experience has been like.
Right, I mean, that's a really good segue to our next point, which is, you know, it's one thing to have a class where you're going to learn about other religious traditions. It's a whole other thing to serve with, be with, dialogue with, have friendships with, develop relationships with, live next door to, share a cubicle wall with somebody who deeply, devoutly believes differently from you. And we take students to interfaith dialogues, you know, sometimes they'll say at the beginning, oh, I just always thought there were Christians and non-believers in the world. I never thought that non-believers are people who actually believe things very deeply, you know, and to wrestle with what is it like to have, you know, to have someone from the Dawa Institute making an argument to me as to why I should be Muslim, you know, to have those sorts of experiences where all of a sudden the world is a lot more complicated than I thought it was, but then to be able to utilize those experiences to actually help deepen our students' faith maturity is what we're doing now.
I'll read these questions now because I think that's relevant. So in Patel's newest book, he says, here are some questions that might arise through getting to know a person of another faith tradition. Let's see, he says, for example, what happens when we find beauty in faiths that we were raised to think were wrong, even evil? What happens when we discover that someone else lives the values of our faith better than we do, and they are of a different faith? What happens when we rely on our faith to help us through a catastrophe and find people from other faiths doing the same thing, finding a similar solace in different prayers? And so he makes the point that that kind of aha moment is really important and potentially very challenging. And that's why preparing students for what that might feel like and having opportunities for conversation afterward is important. I talked about view from here, view from there. Oh, appreciative knowledge. In Robert Putnam's work, he's the Bowling Alone guy. After Bowling Alone, in looking at social capital in religiously diverse contexts. He points out that it isn't just knowledge of another religion that potentially changes a person's mindset about that religion. It's something, I don't know if the words appreciative knowledge are Putnam's words or Patel's, because Patel cites this in his book. But Patel describes it as appreciative knowledge, which means the kind of knowledge about another faith and about some of the followers of that faith that would enable us to see some of the good in that tradition, or to see some of the good and the potential overlap between our faith and someone else's. And so Putnam makes the point, you know, if you just on a survey ask people, what's your impression of Buddhism? The vast majority of people have a positive impression, even if they know absolutely nothing about Buddhism. Because you say, well, what do you know about Buddhism? They'll say, well, you know, the Dalai Lama, he's like a peaceful guy, or there's like yoga or something. But I mean, those are all things with at least neutral to positive associations. If you say to people, what's your impression of Islam? Think of the kind of stuff that they're likely to say, and it's almost always because of the sort of things that are typically in the news. Not that there's nothing behind that, it's just that's what dominates. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we see this as a way to develop maturity in our own lives, but in the lives of our students. That it's not just about those interactions, but it's also about the conversation that we have when we come back on campus. Of being able to talk about what did it feel like, to learn someone else's convictions, to learn all the reasons why they don't believe in Christ, or to learn why they're deeply motivated to service, or why they're more disciplined about fasting than you are, or any of those sort of things. But to then have, a wonderful thing about our community is to have those kind of safe spaces here on campus where we can then process those issues with students and really, try to become responsible believers who know the truth, speak the truth, but live out the truth in our relationships with others. We want to spend some time in the last 10 minutes kind of dialoguing and hearing from you, because one of the goals that we have, regardless of whether or not there's a third year of the Interfaith Service Initiative or those sorts of things, that we want to keep doing this work at Bethel. And so one of our jobs, or one of our goals, is to continue connecting dots between people already doing this work, because a lot of you are, and I know people who aren't here today who are doing that work, but also figure out how do we work together on the challenges of doing this work as well. And so I think we have a couple questions.
Yeah, I'll show the question in 1 second.
Yeah.
The phrase responsible believer comes from a piece by McCormick, which I think is on your bibliography. And basically one of the big points that McCormick makes in that article is McCormick argues that being a responsible believer in anything, whether it's a faith tradition or a philosophy, is being able to look critically at that tradition and maybe ask very serious questions about it, while at the same time continuing to hang on to it. And so, I feel like one of the things that we can model for students would be things like, yeah, I asked this question, no, I don't know the answer to that one, but I'm not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater here. So that's, I just wanted you guys to know where that one came from. Should I put both questions up here at the same time? Yeah. So here's 2 questions we thought of. I'm sure there's others, and maybe you want to ask us questions about something that we've just said. Yes, sir.
I just had a general question. If one had time to read only one book on your bibliography, since before you read many books, you need to read one.
Okay. I think Ibu Patel's kind of dreamy. So no, wow, which one?
If you're just starting off in the literature, Acts of Faith is kind of the groundbreaking book in the literature. It's the one that everybody else is writing about and responding to. McLaren's book, I'm about halfway through. It's good, but it's not particularly academic, as most of his books are not. So if you're thinking about it more from a how do I talk about this outside of academic circles, or how do I think about my church community, or getting involved in these, I think that's a great book. Yeah.
Well, Patel's book, Acts of Faith, is, it's his spiritual autobiography. So you're going to get lots of story stuff.
Yeah,
and, you may or may not groove to that. So
I'm good with stories.
Yeah, good with stories. Yes, ma'am.
I'll just follow up on that. What would you recommend to, let's say, freshmen, and is there a difference between what you'd recommend to them versus seniors of those books?
Well, this is the book my son read as his summer read when he started college at Luther.
Which one?
Acts of Faith.
A lot of
I'm gesturing over here towards 10 books. This one.
And Olaf has used that, I think,
and Patel spoke on
well.
their campus. Yeah. One of the things I very much appreciate about Ibu Patel is he makes it very clear that he takes his faith quite seriously, and that motivates his desire to have meaningful interactions with others and to partner with them. And there are several staff members, several members of his staff, who would self-identify as evangelical Christians as well. And in fact, he said that he's having a conversation with one of these staff members a couple of years ago, and the subject of conversion came up. And one of them said, "I'm really sorry, Ibu, when I talk to you, I so desperately want you to be a Christian because I just really, really care about you. You'd be such a good Christian, but I'm so sorry, I know I shouldn't say that." And Patel's response is, I'd be offended if you didn't say that to me. He said, I might have been offended if that was the first thing you said to me. But we're in relationship. I know your faith is really important to you. I'd be offended if you didn't talk about it. Similarly, I hope you'd be offended if I don't talk about my faith. But he sees it as very much a natural outgrowth of their relationship with each other. So that's one thing I appreciate about him.
Another book I use with first-year students that we don't have out today, but Lauren Winner has a book called Mud House Sabbath, which Lauren converted from Judaism to Christianity. But in Mud House Sabbath, it's a series of short chapters on different practices within the Jewish tradition and how we can think about those in terms of spiritual growth and maturity as Christians. How do we utilize Jewish practices in a Christian context? Students respond really well to the book. It's kind of a way to get your feet wet thinking about a connection between two different faith traditions, but it's not a threatened book to them. So.
Yeah. You're talking mainly about world religions in terms of interfaith dialogue, and I'm did some research in Amsterdam this summer, and I see world religions not be the most relevant or the most powerful in the world of a lot of the people I interviewed, especially younger people in Amsterdam. And does anybody talk about interfaith dialogue with the kind of the postmodern, deinstitutionalized type of spirituality that seems
Patel and Interfaith Youth Corps talk about that. I've heard him speak a few times, and I've noticed that he and other staff members, part of their language has changed because they'll say people of faith and no faith, or people from, and in naming traditions, he'll include things like atheist or agnostic, partly because he's partly trying to make the point that we all live according to, we're all grounded in something, whether it's something that would be traditionally called a religion or something else.
Yeah, I think more of a kind of squishy, personalized spirituality.
Yeah.
So he talks about that.
Yeah, he talks about that some. Does McLaren? I haven't read McLaren's book, so I don't know.
Not yet, but I don't know if he will. I mean, I think the White House Initiative uses language as well as religious and non-religious. I mean, we had students at the gardening event. One of the people that they heard from doesn't identify with any, faith community anymore, and she told her story of why that is. So,
but it would still be spiritual.
Yes, but it would still be spiritual.
Yeah. Well, and in fact, what the St. Paul Interfaith Network is kind of the big umbrella they operate under is the St. Paul Council of Churches, which tends to draw people from traditionally quote-unquote liberal edges of Christianity in particular, and so the majority of people who participate in those events tend to be more liberal examples of their faith tradition, whether it's Catholic or Protestant or Jewish or anything else. And that's been a whole additional set of processing to do with students. The interesting light bulb moment for a student is when a student says, out of the different speakers I heard or the people I talked to at the table, the person I felt the deepest connection with was the imam. And the person I felt the least connection with was the other Christian sitting at my table. And that's a terrifically helpful conversation to have. Not that I can solve it for anyone, I'm just saying it.
I was really interested in, you mentioned this kind of idea of growing up in the world, in a society or a culture where Christianity is no longer kind of the dominant value system or the dominant idea. And I'm wondering if you're seeing that our students are having as much trouble letting go of that as people in our generation are. I mean, is that something they're still working on, or is that something that will pass in time? I know that's a big question.
Yeah, well, first of all, that's a question that you want to think about. This book, he's the one that talks about that quite a bit. And he doesn't even necessarily see that as a bad thing. He just says,
right.
This is a reality of the world. Okay, so what does it mean to be a faithful Christian in that context? And he spends a lot of time talking about Niebuhr's Christ culture categories, and he says we need to rethink that in light of it also. I feel like what I've seen with students, and you can tell me if you've seen this too, I feel like there's a pretty significant divide, and I think it depends a lot on what church tradition you come from. There's the students who believe deeply that Christianity is not only still the dominant religion in this country, but that that's a good thing and it should be, and we need to be aggressive about thinking about that. And then there are the ones who like can't have a meaningful conversation with the people who think that. I mean, there's kind of those two categories.
I think that anecdotally, sort of the vast majority of students are aware that culture has moved in a direction that's more tolerant and more inclusive of different religious traditions, but a significant group of our student body sees that as opposed to Christianity. So, so it's they sort of have grown up in that culture, and they're identifying themselves as as different from it. That's the rejected culture aspect. So, yeah.
Sorry. Never mind. Well, you know what? It's 11 o'clock. I just saw another slide that said for further reference, and I was looking to see what else we had said, but apparently it's whatever we put on our handout.
Feel free to stay in communication with us. If you have a class where you want students to be involved in some sort of initiative or service project or interfaith experience, let anyone on the committee know. If you are already doing a project that we can connect dots with you on that, we would love to do that. And we can think about maybe some faculty development initiatives along these lines, or just keep the conversation going. Yeah. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks for coming.